Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this event, which is part of the celebration organized by the RIBA to celebrate International Women's Day. We are hosting a number of events, both internationally and in the UK, and further information can be found in the chat. May I remind you to submit your questions and comments you may have using the question and answer function. Please include your name and where you're from. Thank you. You can also switch on live subtitles in various languages by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You will find the same information I just read out in the chat, so please keep an eye on that. Today, we celebrate the 8th of March, and every year, the RIBA is putting together a series of events to celebrate International Women's Day. This is a chance to come together and recognize the incredible contribution of women. Throughout history, women have shaped the human experience and transformed our world culturally, socially, politically. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate those achievements. For this session, the RIBA Chapter Chats, which is a series of events that we hold monthly to connect all our members that are around the world, we are delighted to introduce a panel of 4 leading international women architects. Those women will share their journey and experience of working in architecture, how they make the mark in the industry, their successes and challenges, or progressing through their career, and how they encourage other aspiring women architects to succeed in the world of architecture. So before I do anything else, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Today, we're having Nela Zoysa, who is a fellow of the RIBA and initiator of Inaugural chair of the RIBA members Sri Lanka. Leyla Hilmi, who is the chair of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter, part of the RIBA USA chapter, and the founder of Leyla Hilmi Design. Amy Lam, who is a Gulf chapter representative from Jeddah, and she's the founder of Lam Creative. And Soraya Somarathne, who is a representative of the Hong Kong chapter and is the director of Studio Soraya Limited. If you would like to use social media, and we encourage you to do so, please use the hashtags IWD 2021. And today's theme is Choose to Challenge. So please use those 2 hashtags if you want to tweet or use any other social media. They'll be in the chat, so you'll be able to do that throughout the event today. So I would like now to introduce our first speaker, who is Nela Zoysa, who is a fellow of the RIBA and the initiator and inaugural chair of the RIBA members in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Nela.
The chair of the Women in Architecture and Design 2020 program and a Women Architects in Sri Lanka, she is a fellow of 4 international institutes, an honorary fellow of the AIA, a fellow of Sri Lanka Institute of Architects.
I think I'm still live, so.
The Royal Institute of British Architects and the Royal Australian Institute of Architects. With many firsts to her name, Nela Zoysa has trailblazed her way into being recognized as a pioneer. The first Sri Lankan to be elected to the Council of RIBA on an international vote for 6 years, to the Arcasia Council as an office bearer for 4 years, having been a part of Arcasia for 23 years, first Sri Lankan to be elected to the Strategic Council of AIA in 2019, that she presently serves, and while serving on the Council of the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects as the chair of the Board of Architectural Education of the Institute. She was also the first Sri Lankan to win the Arcasia Gold Medal 2000 and the first woman to win the South Asia Architects Award the same year. In 2008, she won the Jeffrey Bawa Commendation Award for Excellence in Architectural Design. Nationally, she has won 18 awards from the SLIA under the categories of Excellence in Architecture, Merit, Honorable Mention, and Color. She also received the Gold Award in 2016 for International Leadership from IFC and Women in Management, a Platinum Award for Architecture in 2009, and the Woman of Achievement Award for the category of Architecture in 1993. Nela Zoysa.
Good morning and good evening, people of the world. Let me now venture on my journey. Born to an architect father, Dr. Justin Samasekara, who brought architectural education to Sri Lanka through the RIBA, a founder, past president, honorary fellow, gold medalist of the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects, then known as the Ceylon Institute of Architects, and a musician mother, Peace, who played first violin for the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka. I consider myself that I have lived my life backwards. Although architecture was my ultimate passion, I excelled in painting and sculpture at the Soraya Brand Art School. I was married off at the age of 18, which stifled my passion for the creative arts and architecture. My two sons, who were a handful, kept me occupied during their tender years. I gained confidence and strength to bid goodbye to my marriage and followed my aspirations to become an architect. While apprenticing for my father's large practice, I ventured onto my architectural studies at the age of 37. I won many awards for my father's firm while being in the School of Architecture. I have to say that going through architecture school was not an easy task for me, being under my father's ever bright shadow. Since my success at school was always attributed to him. However, I was one of the 5 pioneers who graduated from this School of Architecture, CSA, securing the SLIA Charter in 1996. Soon after, I visited Milan and London on work and decided to pay a random visit to the RIBA. That's when I inquired what I needed to do to secure the RIBA membership. RIBA claimed that I was from a school that they had never heard of. Therefore, they stated that I needed to be examined on an individual basis. Maestro Jeffrey Bawa, president of the SLIA, and the head of school, who were members of the RIBA, were happy to provide letters of recommendation to the RIBA on my behalf. RIBA insisted that I come to London to face an interview with one design scheme for each year of study. Having shipped 60 kilos of physical design work to RIBA at a time when scans were unheard of, I faced an erudite panel of academics and practitioners for a day-long interview in London, which indeed was exhausting and a cumbersome task. I was determined not to disclose my relationship to my father, who was well known to the RIBA. Finally, after a day-long interview with the RIBA, the panel was convinced that I was worthy of the suffix RIBA. This grueling task made me determined to have my alma mater, CSA, my unknown school, accredited by the RIBA in order that the future generations would receive equal or better opportunities than I did in my life. Thereafter, I attended every single annual convention of the RIBA, establishing significant contacts in the RIBA leadership. Finally, with the intention of fulfilling the task, I invited the president of the RIBA to visit my unknown school. His visit to Sri Lanka ensured that CSA received the RIBA candidature status of the accreditation process in July 2009. In January 2011, CSA became a fully accredited school, fulfilling the greatest achievement in my life. To me, RIBA was the gateway to the world. AIA and RAIA came automatically due to the reciprocity RIBA enjoyed with those institutes. My ambition to give the future generation of students of CSA equal or better opportunities than what I had experienced was an achievement in my life that I am proud of. While fulfilling all my tasks, I established my own practice under the style and name of Nela de Zoysa Design Corporation Private Limited in 1993, overcoming a challenge. This practice won several international and national awards to my credit. Coming from a background of art and sculpture gave me that added advantage of being an artist architect. House number 8. My first project is house number 8. The inspiration of house number 8, situated in an urban context, was the lifestyle of the clients and a luscious cassia fistula tree on the front boundary of an approximately 700 square meter, 7,600 square feet plot. Both husband and wife, being workaholics, kept crazy hours, returning late at night, having dinner, and either retiring to their bedroom or the hi-fi cinema room. This dictated the design of 2 pavilions on the east and west, connected through a link of structural glass. The entry to the house was accentuated in red, in contrast to the gray granite boundary wall. Cassia fistula tree that created a hindrance at the main entrance of the house was turned into a design feature, allowing the tree to emerge through the house. An elevated walkway ran over the ultramarine blue water body beneath irregular pergolas that cast an unbelievable rhythm of shadows under the tropical sun. Ultramarine blue water body between the pavilions ran through a link to originate as a waterfall from a triple canopied water feature. The house, built of steel, had its structural components exposed and expressed in color as the design feature. The structural steel components were emphasized in either red or black, with its screws and nuts and bolts exposed, contrasting against the tones of gray granite. Lifestyle of the occupants dictated their entry to the house via a triple carport on the western pavilion. Sequentially, the service areas, pantry, and the guest bedroom was located within this pavilion. Water was made to be in abundance to calm and unwind the occupants. The double-heighted master bedroom suite sat on top of the eastern pavilion, while the cinema and the hi-fi room sat on top of the western pavilion. The monotony of the granite wall was broken with bands of dark gray titanium to enhance texture against the white high gloss homogeneous floors and broken gray titanium walls. The serenity of house number 8 creates a haven for peaceful living for its inmates who love seclusion. This project won a SLI Color Award in 2016, along with an honorable mention the same year.
Hi, Valeria, could you turn your camera back on?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Nela. That was really, really good to see the starting of the making of such an amazing and inspirational woman that you are. So thank you very much for that, for the film that you just shown. I'm going to hand over now to Leyla Hilmi. Leyla is the chair of San Francisco Bay Area chapter, part of the RIBA USA chapter. Over to you, Leyla.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, hi. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I grew up and was educated in the United Kingdom, and after 6 years post-Part 2 experience working in London, I did my Part 3 in 1999. Later in that year, I moved to the US, and I've lived here in the San Francisco Bay Area ever since, having my children here and setting up my own business in the town where I live. I'm a sole practitioner and do primarily residential work, which is limited due to the lack of reciprocity between the UK and the US. But to keep my hand in on larger projects and for variety, I've done some project management and owners rep work. For example, a substantial theatre remodel for Mills College in Oakland. I haven't been actively involved with International Women's Day before this event, although I've read articles and I try to keep current in women's issues. I find it hard, if I must, I find it hard to describe what it's like being a female architect, as the female part of it never really felt very interesting or relevant, as really I've always felt it should be about my work. And I would suggest that both male and female architects would agree with me about that, but it's become apparent that there are barriers to women architects progressing in their careers that are mostly not faced by men, and I do feel that I've had some experience of this. I did a little bit of research into this situation, and I discovered that there are 4 types of barriers. 4 types of barriers to women in leadership. This is in the wider work world, not just architecture, but I do think it applies. One is structural barriers. For example, a company using golf as a method of building client relationships. The second one would be institutional mindsets, which is believing that men and women are more suited to different roles or professions. The third one might be individual mindsets, meaning thoughts and mindsets that individuals have that may hold them back or self-select out of the workforce. And then lifestyle choices. Often this refers to the balance between earning a living and the responsibilities of the home, with women frequently responsible for the home in all circumstances. In my situation, after my divorce, I had a parenting plan with my ex-husband, and that was significant in providing me with a framework which gave me time where I could develop my business. What's changed and why am I now interested in getting involved? In terms of women in the US, nobody starts an architecture degree thinking that there are going to be barriers to progression. And I was fortunate not to experience significant obstacles at the beginning of my career. Unfortunately, it's due to the gradual realization that progress has been slow to stop the drain of women from the profession since the start of my career 25 years ago. I didn't notice the lack of significant number of older female architects. I had the good fortune to have been raised and educated to believe that gender is not a factor in career choice, but a possible downside of this was that I was virtually gender blind. If I noticed at all, I would have thought, few senior women architects? Oh, that'll change by the time we're there. So just to look at this, I looked at some statistics about women architects in the US. From NCARB data, which NCARB is a licensing body in the US, we can see that about 46% of architecture students are female, but the number of licensed architects drops to 17% female architects. Then I did a little study from ACSA data. We can see that the number has crept up over time from about 9% in 1990. And my projection shows that we can follow a straight line. If we follow a straight line, it would be 2084 before we have 50% of female architects in the United States. California's companies with over 20 employees are required to give up to 12 weeks of unpaid family leave. This is unpaid, and which covers maternity and paternity requirements. It's more complicated for smaller companies, which architectural firms frequently fall into, which is quite brutal and unfavourable compared with many countries around the world. And but the time spent in maternity leave is a fairly small percentage of career. What is more significant, I believe, is a lack of subsequent flexible working solutions and the need for architecture firms to require extensive and often spontaneous overtime in order for them to be profitable, which generally doesn't work well with family life. It would be interesting to see how this ties into a broader view of how architecture is valued if this scenario is a requirement for a firm's survival. I noted that Dr. Kendall Nicholson, Director of Research at the ACSA, noted that other professions are often compared to architecture do better. For example, doctors are at 41% in the US and female lawyers are 36%, which puts us more than 10% behind our peer professions. And then just for fun, I Googled Google stock images, which if people imagine an architect, who springs to mind? I saw that 42% of individuals, 42 individuals on the first page of results. There were 11 women, 26%, and 31 men. So the proportion is actually better than reality. Almost all the people in the images were white, and strangely, most of them were wearing yellow hard hats. In terms of perceptions of feminism, I find that frequently successful women have often been perceived as aggressive or not feminine. Women who've been seen as career women have been dismissed as not wanting families, as if it's an either-or situation. Conversely, trying to balance family life and work life is sometimes seen as lacking in ambition. The truth is that being a feminist simply means requiring parity, and I struggle to see why that is controversial in the modern world. In the past, speaking up about discrimination and inappropriate behaviour has been seen as troublemaking and attention seeking. I'm optimistic that the principles behind the Me Too movement will start to bear fruit and change the conditions of women at work in a positive way. I believe we need to speak up every time. I have been guilty of letting things pass in the past, and I feel much less inclined to do so these days. Rightly or wrongly, many of us have been brought up not to wish to be seen as angry women, but I do feel that being too relaxed about or excusing poor treatment does none of us any good. Regarding my business, I set up my own business after I had my children, so it was very directly connected to my gender. And I would now say that I self-selected out of the larger architectural workforce to achieve a work-life balance. I think it's less likely, but not impossible, that I would have gone down this route had I been male. However, it has generally been a generally positive route, and I've been able to establish a business and a local reputation for expertise and good service in my area. I do virtually no active marketing, as almost everything comes from word of mouth and close connections I have built up in the community over the years. I think this is probably not to be recommended, as it's harder to control the direction of my work, but this system has been effective in terms of workload, and I am busy all the time. I took my first private project when my daughter was only 2 weeks old, as I was so worried about not earning. I fed her in the car, and then my husband waited with her in the car while I went in and was interviewed by clients, and then I came back and fed her in the car again. It had to be done at the weekend so I could have his assistance. Now I'm quite careful not to do visible work in the evenings or at weekends, although I frequently do to catch up. but I try not to respond to emails or calls until Monday, as I like to keep some boundaries. Similarly, I have an office outside the home and enjoy the separation it brings. I have projects of varying sizes, from small additions and remodels to larger new homes. Although being on the same aesthetic wavelengths as my client is important, I found that my favourite project nowadays are where the emphasis is on reducing the energy consumption of the home. The slide here shows a recently completed new house with landscaping not yet completed, which has a number of measures for energy conservation and adaptations to the environment. Specific features include it's in a very high risk area for wildfire in California, so every material on the exterior is spark resistant. It has solar panels and batteries to store enough to run off the grid in the event of power cuts, which are frequent, and it can last off the grid for up to 5 days. Orientated to maximize light, windows are orientated to maximize light at certain times of the day for various different rooms, but to keep solar gains in the hot summers to a minimum. Operable windows are positioned to encourage natural ventilation. 9-inch thick walls with continuous insulation to keep it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. Roof overhangs providing outdoor shaded space and protection for the windows. Water storage tanks to store up to 30,000 gallons of rainwater from the winter for use in irrigation in the summer. Grey water for recycling, which recycles water from the showers and the laundry for reuse in the landscape. And a partial living roof planted with native species to provide insulation and to encourage butterflies and birds. What can we do for the best results for women architects? I believe that the best results will rely on the following. Obviously, paid maternity and paternity leave for a longer period in the US, I think is paramount, and the willingness of men to take up their rights for family leave. In surveys, men have been noted as being unwilling to take up this provision due to concern that it will negatively impact their careers, a fact that women have known for decades. Additionally, if the male half of a couple earns more than the female half, it can be hard to lose a higher income, so reducing the gender pay gap is paramount. Women supporting women. I think that mentoring would be hugely beneficial. I didn't work with any senior female architects until I worked with Laura Hartman at Furneaux & Hartman when I was in my 30s. If women aren't in your firm at senior levels, I think it would be a good idea to find one who can act as a mentor outside the firm. Educating men. This is best started early, and I've been guilty of discussing women's issues with my daughter, but not my son. However, I described the gist of this presentation to my 16-year-old son, and he was very interested. Teenagers and children have an innate sense of fairness, and it's life experience that makes them less outraged or more cynical. Businesses with women in senior roles are more profitable than ones with only male management, and this is a fact. The lack of support for women in architecture is not just a women's issue, it's a profession-wide problem. Women leaving in significant numbers if they fail to be promoted or the nature of the job makes it unsustainable with family life, diminishes the profession as a whole and wastes the expertise and training of a significant proportion of the available talent.
Thank you, Leyla. Your presentation resonates very much with my own experience as probably of a similar age. I didn't realize there was an issue until I entered the profession. As a student, I wasn't aware because it's very easy to base perception on your individual experience, and I didn't experience that. You know, there were, like you say, is very common for architecture students to be 50-50 or thereabouts. So why should it be an issue being a woman? It's only when you enter the profession that you realize that if not your own experience, but that of your colleagues, experiencing difference in pay, experiencing difficulties in flexibility, that's when you realize that we still got a long way to go. So I get very emotional about these things because I'm a mother of a daughter too, and I would have wished to be further along than we are, but here we are, and we're all doing our bit. So thank you so much. So now I would like to invite Amy to give us her presentation. Amy is a Gulf chapter representative. She's from Jeddah, and she's the founder of ALAM Creative. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm just going to share my presentation. If you just bear with me a minute. Right, can everyone see? Can you see?
I haven't got it just yet.
No, yeah.
Okay, let me just try again. Are you able to see the presentation?
No. Let me share it for you, and you'll just have to prompt me for next slide.
Sure. So while we're waiting, I just want to talk about a bit of my background, because I am in a sort of 3 countries upbringing. I am originally from Hong Kong. I was born there, and I grew up in England, where I did my schooling and then entered into architecture. And I worked there for, after graduating from the Architecture Association, I worked for 6 years, and then we moved here to Saudi Arabia in Jeddah, which is on the Red Sea coast. So I have had a mix of 3 different cultures. And I want to share with you is today actually my story. I think I resonate with many of our speakers today about the challenge of being a woman, of being a mother, and of being a career person. And I think it's a very difficult things to juggle in one person, let alone actually these jobs usually are separated in many cases in the past. So I just want to share with you, my slide today is actually in 3 different stories. It's the stories of myself, it's the stories of the projects that I do here, and lastly is the mentoring program that I engaged in the last 10 years in Saudi Arabia. So my next slide is about my story. So this is a project which was when I was in London setting up SLAM, and this was after working for 2 very good practice of actually having high female leadership in their office, which is David Chipperfield and Eliza Morrison. And I don't remember thinking we are at a disadvantage of gender at that time when I was actually working in both offices, because you didn't feel that. So after 6 years of practice, I decided to set up my own practice with my husband called SLAM, a small practice studios, which we did some exhibition design. We did research program on affordable housing in prefabricated method, and also some residential. The next slide. Yeah, so this is a housing project that I did in London. I think I'm going to, what I do is I would just go into the project in Saudi now. So the next slide. Yeah, so in 2009, I moved to Saudi Arabia with my husband and my young son, at the time 8 months old. And I remember myself is I came here not wanting to be at home, just looking after my son, because I feel that there is so much to give from myself. So I decided actually to do my own work. And at that time, Saudi Arabia is quite a different place. 12 years ago is still a very conservative country, a conservative place. And being a foreign, an expatriate living in a Middle Eastern country has some challenges, but I think a lot of the challenges has been has been received in a positive way. So this is the map of the Red Sea coast, and Jeddah is actually at the bottom, and along is the amazing Red Sea coast, which is now being developed with the Vision 2030. Next slide. The next slide. So when I started working in Saudi, in Jeddah, most of the projects were started off as private houses and also retail projects. And the client's requirements are quite different from what we're used to in the United Kingdom or in Hong Kong. There are protocols within household. There are mixing of men and women in separate entrances. So it's a very interesting time for me to engage myself as an architect of looking at things in a different perspective. Next slide. There's a project which I did is a compound is a residential compound which comprised of 18 houses, and is a first project. If I can turn to the next slide, maybe. Yeah, so it's a project that was that came about from a private developer, boutique developer, where we wanted to change the perception of community. What does that mean by that? Is that it's actually with the opening up of Saudi Arabia, a lot of the younger generation wants to be able to engage together as men and women, rather than through segregation and separation. So it was a project which not only through the architecture, but it's also through its developing its community and people who live there, you start creating and form a different sense of normality that we exist in Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to touch upon just these projects that I've done. This is another project called House Lean. Again, it's a developer with 10 houses. And we have also, at the time, this project was developed almost 8 years ago, when the contemporary architecture scene in Saudi has actually just beginning. So it's also a way to challenge the what is acceptable and what are the build methods that can be accepted within the construction industry here. Next project. This is another project which I use collaborators. So being a small practice, what I've learned very fast, and also being a sole practitioner, is that to expand an office is not an easy overnight thing. So, you know, to engage with expenses, overheads, hiring people to work on projects takes time, particularly in a place where I was not a native. So what I decided to do as my practice is to use people that I know, that I've worked in the past, and collaborate with many different architects around the world. So this was one of the projects that I worked with a friend of mine who is based in Spain with his own practice. His name is Joan Ruzek. And we actually worked on this project together, and through online, through many different means, and me being on site to execute a project. And I think this was a project where we test about transparency and privacy, because you will find a lot of the houses here in Saudi Arabia has almost 4 meters, 5 meters wall. We wanted to actually test a design where you can still have that semi-privacy, but with a view. So this was one of the first projects that we felt actually answered that brief without being, you know, without living in a fort. And this is a completion project with 5 houses in the area. Next project. We've dealt with this one. I think we can move on to the next slide. And this is my recent project at the moment. So this is a beach resort in Opa in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The resort itself has 115 units with fully fledged facilities, and is currently on site in Jeddah with a program of 4 years. I'm working with many different consultants across the Gulf, actually. So we have Egyptian consultants. We're working with Cracknell, which is a landscape consultant in Dubai. My team and my collaborators, we are in Portugal. So what we want to do is to bring in a community where the sense of it's a sense of not just pleasure, but I think with changing of Saudi Arabia being much more open, this project is on the Red Sea and is primarily is to actually promote water sports activities, children's engagement. I think we can go back to the other one, Rick, if you can. So this is one of the front view, which is currently under construction, and this is another view from the beach side of the project. So next slide. So I also got engaged with mentoring young students, female architects, since 2010. One of the reasons is that I think because the scene of architecture here is limited. We do not have the RIBA as such to have activities and lectures and so forth. So this is one of the reasons why I joined the RIBA Gulf, to actually particularly work on this area. And a lot of my work has been about mentoring students, mentoring young Saudi female architects who wants to get into the profession, who has a lot of questions about how to start the profession. So these are some of the work that I do alongside with my architecture work. Next. So this was a very interesting project that came to me called SENSI. It's called the Saudi National Creative Initiatives. This was through a lady called Savannah Dahlan, a Saudi lawyer, which an entrepreneurship business about the creative industry. So she asked me to come on board as a chief program officer to run workshops in 12 creative sectors identified by the UNESCO. And we did it over 3 months, back-to-back workshop over 3 cities, which Jeddah, Riyadh, and Khobar, Riyadh being the capital of Saudi Arabia. And at the time, this was in 2006. So it's a very changing landscape from where we are today. We had to have sponsorship for visas for expats to come. Women under 35, the workshop instructors were harder to get visa to come. So we had to overcome many challenges when we actually brought this workshop to Saudi Arabia. Next. So this was some of the photos. We had covered from architecture to fashion to tourism, creative initiatives, innovation, crowdfunding. And one of the very interesting things that we discovered actually is that essentially the 3 cities have very different way of thinking of its people, how they deal with business-wise. And I think one of the workshop, which was from Phil Heaton, who is in the Cape Design Council, and he gave a workshop on the landscape project. And with his workshop, he had oversubscribed of all female designers and architects, and he took them on site. There was a site project where none of them had actually been on site before. So it was their first experience. So many things that came up from this initiative, which is about bringing new perspective to local audience, making people think out of the box is very crucial. And I think it's rewarding to see the outcome of these workshops that actually impact over 5,000 participants. Next. And then, so these are some of the workshops that happened in 2006. And as you can see, it attracted a lot of female to sign up, wanting to learn about many different aspects of the creative industry. We also had a program for educating younger children with creative art. So the idea of about mentoring is not from an older age of architecture students. I think it's about actually from the younger age where you promote the creative thinking, the problem solving from a very young age. Next. And then my involvement with the Gulf chapter. So these are the pictures that had taken in the past few years from the chapter's meetings to the RIBA presidents who visited Dubai for events. I think some of the RIBA Gulf chapter's activities is really about that. It's about setting standards. It's about setting dialogues and create dialogue so that actually there is a very healthy environment for architects, networking, communications, and enjoy sort of the side of things that we somehow do not have openly access to it until, you know, until we have all these online activities goes on in the past year. Next. So finally, I want to leave this last image with you. This is an image of myself with the team on site in the resort project. It's a reminder of still how much work we still have to do as women architects to move forward. I think what is really interesting in a place like Saudi Arabia is that there are many things that is coming forward, which is pushing the agenda of women equality, equal pay opportunity. All of this actually is coming to light in a faster pace than we know it in, let's say, in the United Kingdom. If I have to share some statistics with you, is that, you know, in 2015, 52% of all university graduates in Saudi Arabia were female. Saudi women constitute about 52% of the Saudi university students. The largest female university in the world is in Riyadh, Princess Noor bin Abdulrahman. And there are currently 36 universities in Saudi who, some of them are female only. And I think the important thing that is to learn is that how we as female architects help to promote what we do. I think the important thing is to develop and promote our growth through professional means, through mentorship, through networking opportunities, platform to discuss challenges, advantages, and how we can improve areas in certain aspects. And I think the work that I continue to do will be something that I really enjoy doing, and I think I will continue to do wherever I go. Thank you so much.
I was on mute. Thank you, Emmy. That's been incredibly interesting. I know Emmy and I know the work that she's been doing, and I had the privilege to visit the Gulf chapter, and thank you so much for everything you're doing. But you're right, we have a duty to the next generation. So mentoring is very important. I think it was mentioned by the previous speakers. Leyla mentioned that in particular, having role models is incredibly important as well. So have given visibility to women, not because feminism. I want to go back to something that Leyla said. She said feminism shouldn't be controversial, and it shouldn't be, because it's not about asserting women's superiority. It's about equality. Is nothing more than asking what is within everybody's right to be appreciated for what people can do, regardless whether they're men and women. And this is what we're talking about today. It's for worker women to be recognized and not hindered by the fact that they're women. So thank you so much to all our speakers, and we're coming to our last speaker, but last but not least, Soraya, who is the youngest representative here. It's great to see the new generation taking part in an event such as this. So Soraya Somarathne is a representative from the Hong Kong chapter, and she's the director of Studio Soraya Limited. So over to you, Soraya.
Thank you, Valeria. And also, might I just say, it's a real privilege to be sharing this platform with Amy, Nela, and Leyla. So thanks for sharing your work. So I will just share my presentation. So let's see. I'm hoping you can see it. Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm just going to jump straight into this. I wanted to sort of start this presentation by covering sort of the areas around the world that I've actually worked, and the little red dots highlight sort of the majority of the experience that I've had. I've sort of skipped around east to west really, because I've spent some time in London, Paris, Dubai, Chicago, Shanghai, and then ending up actually in Hong Kong for 10 years and getting sort of the bulk of my experience in Hong Kong and also sort of China, Asia Pacific area. But I think the reason why I wanted to bring this slide up is because I think, you know, yes, it's International Women's Day, but for me, International Women's Day is more about this idea of international and sort of celebrating diversity. We've seen today 3 other women that are actually working in countries that, well, 2 other women actually are working in countries that are not countries where they were born. And it's obviously quite brave to sort of skip over to somewhere else and start a company and do all that. And that's something that I have a great sort of experience doing. So I think it's an International Women's Day, but it's also, for me, it's International Day and sort of celebrating that diversity. So Hong Kong, I have a great passion for Hong Kong. It has become my home as well as London. I was born and raised in London, but I see both as being a big part of my life. And I think what I wanted to sort of share initially, Valeria says I'm very young, or the youngest here, but it's actually, there were 2 game-changing projects for me. Both of those projects were when I graduated and were working for international companies. Those 2 projects were 2 hotels. The first was the Murray Hotel, the second was the Fleming Hotel. The reason they were game changers was because they basically introduced me to 2 areas of architecture that I sort of fell in love with. And one was this idea that, you know, you can use architecture to sort of connect your world back to nature. By the way, I'm fully aware that these principles are quite sort of obvious, but it's actually quite important to sort of reiterate them because they formed a huge part of what my company's principles are. So there was this idea of connecting to nature, which I will briefly talk about in the next few slides. And then with the Fleming Hotel, there was this sort of introduction into how architecture itself can not only benefit that site, but actually benefit the entire community. So if I just skip to the Murray, I was a design architect on the Murray. This is a Foster and Partners project by Nicola Hotels, and I was one of maybe 5 or 6 architects working on this project, mixture of boys and girls actually. And I think what was just so important about this project was this idea that a building can work very hard at actually bringing nature back in, not just sort of rejecting it and sort of creating boundaries between what nature is and what's inside the space, but actually bringing nature in. And it was a key part of this project. It was working on a separate building outside where I had to study the facade, what was happening with the existing building, which is this sort of sawtooth facade here, which, by the way, the original architects, the existing building, the original architects spent a huge amount of time studying solar patterns and how you can actually optimize the space by creating these sawtooth facade in order to sort of get really comfortable temperatures inside and, you know, maximize daylighting and that sort of thing. So taking those principles and actually applying it to a horizontal facade, if you like, because the building that I started to sort of connect this design language to was actually an auxiliary building on the outside of the main building. And so we flipped it. I basically flipped an existing facade horizontally, and there were all sorts of implications to that actually. But what was important about it was this idea that, you know, in this case, a roof system is working exceptionally hard to get lighting in, to get the optimized temperatures inside. And it was just this idea of using architecture to connect to nature, maybe not as obviously as sort of seeing a tree, but actually in this case, the windows were sort of the geometries of the windows were designed so that you could get the maximized views out to existing trees and things. But it was the idea that architecture could work that hard to actually connect the occupant back to nature. And particularly in a place like Hong Kong, where you're just surrounded by a lot of concrete, this became sort of a key fundamental principle to me when I went on to sort of design new buildings. The second game changer was the Fleming Hotel. This was a project that was my first sort of big project where I was a lead architect, had sort of a lot of control. And, you know, I did this project with a work of substance, a small boutique branding firm. Also, they work on interiors. And what was so key about this project and sort of opened my eyes was the fact that you can use a building to actually tap into what's happening in the community and benefit the community as a whole. And how we did this was we didn't just focus on creating a sort of, you know, eye-catching design. We tried to understand what about the surrounding community can plug into this project? So we engage local artists, we engage photographers. You can see in some of these pictures, you know, there's a lot of sort of very Hong Kong specific work, which is very atmospheric. And part of the reason why I think these things are atmospheric is they're coming from the local people. They're coming from the people that live and breathe Hong Kong every day. It wasn't just about the artwork or the photography, it was also about materials. We engaged local suppliers. We also, you know, tapped into sort of offcuts of other projects. So again, bringing back this idea of sustainability and connecting back to nature, we didn't want to create any waste. So we actually looked at other projects that were happening at the same time and said, you know, if you're going to waste those materials, we'll take them on and we'll do something fantastic with them. So we ended up with what I feel is a pretty fantastic project in Hong Kong. If you're ever there, do check it out. But the key principles here were connecting to nature and tapping into the local community. So then I decided, okay, well, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna try my own studio, but there was something missing. And I think it's quite important to highlight that even though I identified this idea of connecting with nature, I also, you know, fell in love with this idea of using a project to benefit the community. But I think there was a third thing that sort of tied this all together, and this idea that you can actually use architecture to rejuvenate environments, repair environments, reduce carbon emissions, and create livable neighborhoods that don't cause any harm. So I'm just going to quickly go through because I'm aware of time. My company puts well-being at the heart of its architecture. Architecture is at the heart of our well-being. That's sort of my mantra, but it's these three ideas: connecting with nature, benefiting the community, and causing no harm, that sort of underline the work that I do. So a quick snapshot of some of my projects. My company's only 4 years old, so a lot of it's concept at the moment. You know, I've done pretty well in competitions. I'm working on a live project at the moment, which I'm very excited about. So, you know, as young architects, all you want to do is build. So that's pretty exciting as well. And I thought I would just give you a little bit of an in-depth look into some of my projects. So I've got a project here which I did for a competition in Seoul. And again, going back to these ideas of connecting to nature, benefiting the community, and causing no harm, this project tapped into heritage craft. Rami weaving, which is a certain kind of weaving that's specific, it's actually protected in Korea. And I used this craft to actually, you know, create the facades of this pavilion. So it was really understanding what was happening locally and, you know, finding ways to actually, you know, blur this boundary between the architectural envelope and nature. And that was a visual at the end of that. A project in Italy that I did fairly well in, again, if I just jump to what this was about, it was about understanding the wider context. This was a very flat site, and so what was important was to actually elevate oneself in order to really enjoy the fact that in Mantua you're surrounded by Lake Garda, the Alps, and various other really amazing sort of geographical sites. So it seemed pretty clear to me we had to elevate ourselves, and that involved creating a sort of aeronautics launch pad, if you like. The existing buildings it's an 18th century court, and I just basically figured out what do I need to get rid of and what do I need to protect. And I ended up clearing the site of a lot of sort of more contemporary structures, dilapidated structures, but keeping the heritage architecture, and then creating these really beautiful green runways and green launch pad sites. And this became a hotel concept. So I'll just flick through to, again, just keeping the atmosphere and the general look and feel of what was already there, connecting back to history, connecting back to nature, but also giving it a sort of contemporary feel. And, you know, the star sort of element of this project was just this idea that you don't actually have to build loads of infrastructure to create a sort of aeronautical or an airport, if you like. You can actually do things in a very green way. And then finally, the latest project that I have worked on recently was this idea that Hong Kong could actually, in the light of COVID, start using some of its towers that were maybe not being utilised as much whilst everyone was working from home to create something agricultural. Hong Kong does not excel in agriculture, but I started to think about how could Hong Kong start to generate its own agriculture by involving hydroponics. I won't go through this in detail, but I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of how my work connects nature with the community in an effort to sort of rejuvenate the environment and almost like offset any damage that's already been done. So these are just sort of a few of my drawings. It's quite engineering, if you like. Involving hydroponics in any sort of indoor environment is not an easy task. And This is just a visual at the end. So I think, what I want to leave you guys with after this presentation is that whether you're a man or a woman, I mean, I think for me, everyone is to be celebrated who's actually got ideas. I think the strength is not necessarily in gender. I think strength ultimately is in ideas and how you execute them. And I think that's sort of how I would like to leave this sort of last speaker, leave on a positive note. If you've got ideas and you can express them, I think that's where the strength lies. I don't necessarily think it's relevant or it matters whether you are male or female. Thank you, Valeria.
Thank you, Soraya. That was really interesting, and I totally agree with you. But that's what we need to get, I think. The bottom line is where we want to be. We want to be that what matters is ideas and talent and not necessarily gender. So we want to get to a point where women don't find obstacles because they're women. And the only limitation would be the limitation of ideas and talent. So thank you, Soraya. Right, I would like to ask, I'm going to start the next session, which is a bit of question and answer. I've got a fantastic question from Andy Shaw from the golf chapter. But before I ask the question from Andy, I would like to ask my own question to the panel. What does International Women's Day mean to you? I think you already said it in your presentation, but I'd like to, if you were to summarize it very briefly, what does today means to you? And it will mean different things to different people. For those of you watching these presentations, please remember that you can use social media and the hashtag are International Women's Day 21 and choose the challenge as for anything on social media. Thank you. So may I ask you all of our panelists, what does today mean to you? Shall we start with Nela as the first presenter?
Okay. This is a day where we could celebrate the achievements of international women. When women are empowered, loved, acknowledged, incredible things happen. Faith renews, bonds strengthen, generations flourish. Having said that, I'm proud to say that Sri Lanka produced the first woman Prime Minister in Sirimavo Bandaranaike, who passed down her legacy to her daughter, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, who held her office as the President of Sri Lanka for 12 years. I'm humbled by the Gold Award bestowed on me by the IFC and the Women in Management for the Best Women Leadership. It was bestowed on me. That was a Gold Award in 2016.
Thank you, Nela. Thank you. Leyla, what does today means to you?
I think it's really drawing attention to the contributions and accomplishments of women, and also to the challenges that we continue to face. It's a reminder that we need to speak up when things aren't right, and to support each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Leyla. Amy. Amy, you're on silent.
Yeah, I share similar sentiments with our previous speakers. Is that I think it is a day where we have to take a breather and remind ourselves that yes, we are multitasking. Yes, we are constantly between our career, our family, with our mothers. And I think, and it's a day really we have to appreciate ourselves and the work that we contribute towards making a fairer and a better world. And I think that's what a day to remind all of us of that.
Thank you, Emmy. That's really good. Soraya.
Yeah, I totally agree with everybody. I think, I come from a family of 4 women, and everyone is international. My poor father, but basically, for me, as I said previously, it's about this idea of being international as well. And I think diversity, and there are lots of prejudices out there, and I think that gender is one, and there are many others. But I think for me, today is a day to sort of remember a lot of the women in my life that have really sort of supported me. There are many sitting in Hong Kong at the moment, particularly in the Hong Kong chapter, many amazing women that are just very encouraging and supporting of everything that we're doing. And I think it's just a day to just sort of take stock of that, and just to be thankful and say thanks to those women that are really sort of, pushing other women to go and achieve as much as they can.
Thank you, Soraya. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you all hear me? Oh, great, because I've lost sound, so I do apologize. So I'm coming to the question asked by Andy, which I think is a really, really relevant question. What do you think is the most important thing that men can do, both inside the office and out? So, Nela.
Working as an architect, I've never had any kind of hindrance where men were concerned. But I must say, institutionally, I found a lot of obstacles. But never in my practice. Not with clients, not with contractors, no one. Never realized that I was anything different.
So I have to apologize. I'm sorry, I don't hear anymore, and I cannot see anybody anymore.
Oh my God.
Sorry, can I?
Area. Would Amy, would you like to take a go at answering?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Amy.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I do agree with that. I have not come across any discrimination myself. Like, I think we all kind of felt that coming into architecture as a career, as schooling, etc. However, but I do remember, I can share with you stories that I have been indirectly been told. I think I remember I was on a site back in London. It was with very large contractors. We were a team of 20 architects on site. Half of us were female, the other half were male. And I remember in a contractors meeting, there was a comment made that most of the women on site were secretaries. And it didn't really hit me in the sense that I wasn't offended, because I knew that it wasn't a comment that had any meaningful weight to it. But I think it's the perception in general in construction industry. And I think coming to Saudi Arabia, where it is a predominantly men construction industry, it is predominantly a male practice. Although I have to say, and I'm very happy to say, that there are smaller, younger female practices of Saudis are opening up. And there are challenges that here, I recognize that, but I just don't, I think my advice is not to allow any of those things that really affects your performance and your ability as an architect. And I feel that, I think as what Andy asked the question, is that I think it's just bringing awareness that it's not really about the gender, the color of your skin. It is really about what your ability to give as an architect. And time again, I am always the only female on the site with 150 people. But it doesn't really, it's not daunting, because you know that you can do the job. So there's nothing to stop you doing your job. whether it's male or female. So I think the question is that it's just bringing the awareness that it's not really, it shouldn't really affect your performance.
Thank you, Emmy. I managed to rejoin. Leyla.
I'm thinking that I would probably say for men in senior positions, which is, as we discussed, in architecture firms, the majority of senior roles are still held by men. I think to be aware of the need to support younger members of the firm, both men and women, in their own an ability to balance work and family life. If men support men who are trying to achieve that, that also helps women. And so it's not necessarily asking women for special treatment. It's just trying to reevaluate how our relationship with the world of work is changing. I think COVID has been interesting because it's demonstrated that there's a weakness in the fact that almost everything I've read have said that women have borne the burden of homeschooling, etc. Which is disappointing. So I think that would be my comment. It's to men in senior positions. And then the second thing I think men could do is to speak up and not to tolerate other men behaving poorly. So whether women are present or not present, it's just to make it unacceptable to have the sort of conversations and discussions that we all know have taken place in the past. So
thank you, Leyla. And Soraya.
Yeah, in contrast to Leyla, I would, moving forward, I would say, you know, there's an element also of just wanting men to relax as well, because, you know, everything's becoming so sort of PC, you know, connected. And, you know, I've come across situations where men are unsure as to how to behave. And in a way, it sort of takes all the fun out of it, because at the end of the day, you know, when you're on site and when you're in meetings that are predominantly male, you know, women, I mean, me personally, I can't speak for all women, but as a woman, I do enjoy the banter that happens on site. I do enjoy, you know, the odd joke here and there. And I would hate to see the industry sort of, you know, throttled by this idea that men can't relax and be themselves. So I would say men, you know, my opinion would be that you know, men can also relax and realize that, you know, women like me anyway are not going to call them out on the odd sexist joke or whatever. It's part of the fun of being an architect as well. So yeah, I think that's all I'll say on that one.
Thank you, Soraya. Right, I'm going to ask you another question. We have got a comment from Rufina from Hong Kong. Thank you, Rufina. Basically, she's saying, thanks to all the speakers for sharing their inspiring and challenging journeys. We need platform to celebrate the success of female architects and to bring equality in the profession. I think that word equality is the most important one. So I would like to ask, and I will start with Soraya this time. How could you contribute your wisdom, expertise, or ideas to empower other women?
Well, I still feel like I've got a huge amount to learn. I saw, you know, I don't know how much sort of wisdom I have at the moment, but I teach, and I'm always saying whether, you know, I have male or female students, that again, it's similar to how I ended my presentation, you know, strength is in ideas, and it's about what you do in life, it's about what you contribute. It's not really about all these other distractions like gender or race or otherwise. So I would just say to the younger females and males out there that at the end of the day, it comes down to what you contribute, it comes down to what your ideas are. And if you can get those across, then you shouldn't let yourself be distracted by other lesser issues.
Assuming that they'll be allowed to. That's the bottom line, because I think that's what we're trying to say. It's not the lack of talent or ideas, it's whether they are allowed to express that. So Leyla.
Sorry, I have a determined cat that's trying to leave on my lap. I keep pushing him away. I think he's gone. I would say there's a few ways we can contribute. One is to, I find that I talk to people about what I do a lot, and younger people, my kids' friends, and my friends who aren't really aware of what architects do, and many people are. I think they think it's a lot of, drawing and thinking, contemplating deep thoughts without being aware of the practical nature of our job as well. I recently was appointed as a planning commissioner on our local town's planning board, and I'm the only design professional of the 7 of us. And so we review projects as they come up that require planning permission. And so in terms of being more prominent in terms of what I do in my community, this is good. And as well, I feel that I can contribute in a knowledgeable way to the character of where I live. And then the final thing is to mentor younger architects as they come through the system and provide both professional and also just a kind of a networking type of support.
Thank you, Leyla.
Yeah.
I want to keep it brief because we've got one very, very interesting question I'd like to finish on. Amy.
Yeah, I think a lot of my work is really about mentoring, particularly in Saudi Arabia. I have to share this story with you. Once I was invited to a primary school to give a talk about being an architect. As I walked into the room, a 7-year-old boy said to me, "I thought architect is a man." So I in a very sweet way, and I said, "No, actually, professions, architects, and male and female, we're all doing the job." So it's interesting that from the perspective of a boy at the school here, where certain professions are deemed as a male-orientated profession. And I think that is really coming from a younger, it's the education of the younger generation. Maybe not so relevant in some other countries, I would say, but I think in other areas of the world, there's still that stigmatism that we have to get over. And I think the only way to do that is really bringing ourselves to speak about what we do and how we do it. And that's really from a very young age, from primary school age. And I think more significant in some countries than others. And that's for sure, is the work will continue as mentoring. But I think developing and promoting women's growth is also very important.
Thank you, Amy. Nela. Nela, you're on mute.
I think in my presentation, I spoke to you about my journey, how I became what I am today. And it is with my hope that my story will inspire and empower women to overcome obstacles in exchange of achievements. The American Institute of Architects, the international region, chose me to chair the virtual conference on women in architecture and design 2020. That I did along with the RIBA members Sri Lanka. This was a wake-up call for all women who faced challenges in life. So we had, very famous architects from the US, UK, Italy, South Africa, Pakistan, India, Singapore, China, and Australia talk about their journey, various journeys, empowering women, architects and designers.
Thank you, Nela. I've got time for just one last question, and there is something that is a question from Tim Clark. It was really interesting, but I don't know if we got the time for that. I've got a question from Sandy, and I think it's very poignant. Do you all own your own practices because you hit the concrete ceiling in the wider workplace? Is this your response to this? So is it, we all, and I put that myself into that, do we all own our own practices? Do we all practice in our own name because we found somehow there was a bit of a glass ceiling or a concrete ceiling, as Sandy said, that forced us to go independent, to find that work and life balance that Leyla so well spoke about earlier. What is your answer to that? And I go to Amy.
Owning your own practice, that's the question. Yes, I do. It has been a challenge for me to set up here in Saudi Arabia. I think it's quite different from the UK, where I had a practice there before. It is under my own name, and I think I'm the principal architect of the practice. However, in order, without going into too much details, in order for me to have a practice, I have to be under the sponsorship of a Saudi sponsor. So it's a different kind of business setup to what the norm is. However, yes, I think there are challenges to set up here as an expatriate, not as a woman, but as an expatriate. But I do, and I think you can always overcome something if you want to make something happen. This is really what I see myself doing here.
I think Sandy's question was really like, did you feel that you had to set up your own practice because you didn't find any other way of reaching what you wanted to reach as a woman within another's practice?
I think it's not as a woman. I think it's not a woman issue, but is as someone who, when I first came here, and even in London, is that I think at some point in your life when you worked for different design practice, I think ultimately you want to exercise your own work into what you do and express yourself within what you can do. And I think it's a natural progression for many architects that I know who wants to do that. Now the challenge is how you grow your small studio to become successful. I think that's always a challenge of the growth of something, to sustain a small practice. How do you sustain? How does the overhead work? And I think this is now a new era of us working online. And I think how do we actually start collaborating with different parts of different architecture firms across the world to bring in a team of a bigger project? So I've had contact from people who say actually they want to bid for very big projects here. And I think that the way forward is to reanalyze the way how we practice in the future. And I think the RIBA should be leading that front of the conversation.
Thank you, Amy. We literally got 3 minutes because the call will stop. So can I ask Soraya a very, very quick word about is the reason that you didn't feel that you could pass the glass ceiling the reason why you set up your own company or not?
No, definitely not. It had nothing to do with any kind of gender-related thing. It was more to do with the fact that Hong Kong is just one of those places where a lot of people are setting up their own sort of thing, practices in any industry. And I think it was more a cultural thing. It wasn't a reaction at all to any kind of gender policy.
Thank you. Thank you. Nela?
Well, mine was slightly different. I was quite happy doing my practicing with my father until I was actually pushed to have my own practice by one of my mentors, Untitled, who pushed me, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to join you, to give you a head start to practice." So that's how mine was quite different.
Thank you, Nela. Thank you.
Doing what I was going to do.
Okay, thank you, Nela. Leyla?
Well, it's hard to be succinct. I initially started my own business as a stopgap while my children were young, and I wasn't sure what I would do when they were older, whether I would try and go back to a larger firm or not. I did investigate it briefly when they were older, but I decided that I liked the control of running my own business, and I also at that point had a break in the larger work firm, and I'd been focusing on residential work, and I was seeing obstacles in trying to get back into larger firms without taking a step backwards and going for a more junior role. So at that point, I decided to actually double down on my efforts to run my own business and to put all that energy into being successful in my own name. And I sort of took it forward from there.
Thank you, Leyla. I think we have got literally now 3 minutes to the end of the connection, so we'll have to summarize. As I said, that we got a fantastic question by Tim Clark, and I'd say that probably the answer is yes, because his question was about whether you had a male colleague, partner, or peer group that's been significant to your success. Or do you see this an exclusively female struggle? I can say that I'm sure that everybody will echo that. Of course, there have been significant male along the way. They've not been. I don't think that being a male is necessarily a hindering quality for female. So I think is the answer would be yes, Tim. So I want to thank you all for today. You've been an amazing audience. Thank you for your questions. I love the fact that we've had two of the three questions were from men, and it's great because this is, as has been said in our presenters' presentations, this is not a women's struggle. This is a societal struggle. Seeing so much talent wasted because so many women leave the profession is not benefit anybody. So having a more equal architectural profession all over the world will benefit everybody. So I think it's great that our colleagues, male colleagues, will join us into this moving forward to more equality in the workplace and outside of it. So thank you so much. You've all been fantastic. I remind you the hashtags once again is IWD21 and choose to challenge is the other hashtag. So I wish you all a fantastic International Women's Day. Let's make sure that it's not, the conversation will carry on. And beyond the one day a year when we seem to be allowed to speak freely about this. Please join the other events organized by the RIBA. As I said, there'll be international and UK events that you can join today. And finally, I'd like to remind all of you that the next chapter chat is on Wednesday, the 24th of March. And we are inviting the Gulf chapter to speak about their experience of living and working in the Gulf. So that will be the theme of the next chapter chat on the 24th of March. Please let Chloe and Emma know if you want to join it. And I really look forward to seeing all of you on the 24th. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you, Nela, Soraya, Leyla and Amy. It's been very, very, very interesting and I've learned a lot. So thank you for being such inspiring panelists. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, P. Thank you, P, for everything, for moderating this panel.
Thank you very much, Nela. Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.